What if I told you that promoting the absolute best, most brilliant coder on your team to management is like statistically one of the fastest ways to completely ruin your product?
I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
It goes against literally everything corporate culture teaches us about career advancement.
Right.
But the data we are looking at today proves it happens, well, constantly. You take a 10x developer, you give them a team, and suddenly both their output and the team's morale just flatline.
It's wild. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are thrilled to have you with us today.
Glad you could join us.
So our mission today is to extract the very specific, highly guarded secrets of what makes a truly great software engineering manager. We're figuring out how you transition from, the world of binary code into the messy, highly unpredictable world of human leadership.
Which is quite the leap.
It really is. And to do this, we are unpacking a massive stack of internal documentation today.
Yeah, some really incredible primary sources.
Right. Like we have the actual detailed career progression frameworks from companies like Monzo and Square.
Which are rare to see.
Exactly. And we also have this incredibly granular hiring guide from an agency called ZYTHR. But the anchor of today's deep dive, the piece that really brings it all together.
Is that Microsoft study?
Yes. A massive mixed methods empirical study by Microsoft that surveyed over 3,600 engineers and managers.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you look closely at the Monzo and Square progression matrices, there's literally a breaking point in the chart.
Yeah, a distinct line.
Right, where the skills that make someone a top-tier software developer, they stop being rewarded. And a fundamentally different set of skills takes over.
Because what the documentation reveals is that navigating a tech organization requires understanding that management it's not just a promotion for writing good code. It is an entirely different profession.
A whole new job. Exactly. And this matters immensely to you, whether you're, say, an aspiring engineering manager trying to chart your career, or a developer trying to decode why your boss operates the way they do.
Or even a founder trying to figure out why your engineering team is burning out.
Right. So we really need to understand this transition.
Well, we should jump straight into the advanced friction points here because the Monday.com source highlights a major identity crisis for new managers.
Oh, absolutely.
They note that true technical leadership marks a shift from personal output to multiplying the impact of the entire team. A lot of old school business books compare this to, moving from being a violinist to being the conductor.
Which is a classic analogy.
It is, but for software, I kind of look at it differently. It's less about moving from violin to conductor and more about moving from being a single CPU processing complex algorithms to, well, becoming the load balancer.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, because your job is no longer to execute the math, right? Your job is to route the traffic, manage the heat, and just ensure the servers don't crash.
That load balancer analogy gets right to the heart of what the ZYTHR hiring guide calls the accountability scope.
Right, the accountability scope.
Yeah, and the guide explicitly warns against blurring the lines between roles. Because we all know traditional project managers, right? They worry about the Gantt charts, the timelines, the deliverables.
Yeah, they manage the what and the when.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the tension between tech leads and engineering managers, that is where things get really messy. A tech lead is accountable for technical excellence and system architecture.
And the data shows they are still spending roughly 30 to 70% of their time hands-on coding, right?
Yes, exactly. They are still a CPU.
So effectively, the tech lead manages the code, but the engineering manager manages the environment where that code is written.
Precisely. According to the breakdown, an EM spends almost zero time coding.
Zero. Wow.
Yeah, they're entirely focused on career planning, headcount, team productivity, and, stakeholder alignment.
Oh, wait, when organizations try to combine those two roles, like to save money or something?
Oh, neither gets done well. It's a disaster. The tech lead ends up micromanaging the humans, and the engineering manager ends up micromanaging the code.
Which is the exact opposite of what you want.
Right. The Microsoft study actually points out a paradox here. It's very similar to the famous Peter Principle, where promoting the absolute best technical person into management often backfires.
Because they refuse to step back from the code base.
Exactly. They just can't let go.
I have to push back on that, though. Just like from a developer's perspective, shouldn't the manager of a software team at least be able to outcode their subordinates? I mean, if an engineer is stuck on a complex architectural problem and the manager can't jump in and solve it, doesn't that manager instantly lose the respect of the room?
It's a fair question, But the assumption that technical supremacy equals respect is exactly what the Microsoft study dismantles.
Really?
Yeah. They discuss this concept of the diminishing returns of technical excellence. So let's say a senior engineer takes 3 days to write a feature, and the manager knows, hey, I could do it in 1 day. If the manager jumps in and writes it, they haven't saved 2 days. They've actually become a bottleneck
Wait, how are they a bottleneck if it gets done faster?
because they've robbed that engineer of the learning curve. Meaning next month, that same engineer will still take 3 days to do a similar task.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the manager has fundamentally failed at their actual job, which is growing that engineer's capability for the long term.
Which means treating the team itself as the software system that needs to be optimized rather than just doing the work for them.
Exactly.
Okay, so if being the best coder isn't the job, how are we defining greatness? Because the Microsoft study is incredible here. They didn't just ask a few executives what they thought.
No, they went deep.
They used a mixed methods approach. They combined quantitative surveys of thousands of engineers with deep qualitative interviews to identify 15 core attributes of great engineering managers.
And they categorized these into three main functions, right?
Sure. Yep. Cultivates, motivates, and mediates. Plus, they had two foundational traits overarching it all. Is available and is technical.
And the scale of that data is what makes it so hard to argue with. I mean, when you ask 3,600 people what actually moves the needle on their daily productivity,
You cut through the corporate buzzwords very quickly.
exactly, you get to the truth.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Out of those 15 attributes ranked by those thousands of engineers, is technical ranked 14th,
Second to last.
second to last. When I read that, I was like entirely caught off guard. I expected architectural brilliance to be top 3, but it barely registered. Why do you think engineers actively deprioritize their boss's coding skills like that?
What's fascinating here is that the causality comes entirely down to autonomy. The reason is technical ranks so low is that if your manager is a vastly better coder than you, the temptation for them to micromanage your implementation is nearly irresistible.
Oh, because they know exactly how they would do it.
Right. Engineers actually prefer a slightly less technical manager because it forces the manager to trust the engineer's process. It's not that technical skill doesn't matter.
Right, it's foundational.
Yeah, an EM needs enough technical depth to review architecture and, not be fooled by padded estimates. But if they are the smartest coder in the room, they stifle the team.
They suffocate the talent. So instead of technical dominance, the number one attribute overall in the survey was maintains a positive working environment.
Which falls under the motivates category.
Right. And close behind that were grows talent and enables autonomy, which fall under cultivates. But how does an EM enable autonomy without just being an absentee boss? Because saying, here's the work, figure it out, sounds a lot like abandonment if it isn't structured properly.
What's fascinating here is the distinction between dictating the process versus dictating the outcome.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, there's a brilliant qualitative quote in the Microsoft study from a manager who inherited this massive pile of broken legacy code.
The nightmare scenario?
Exactly. Now, an average manager would have stepped in and assigned specific bug fixes to specific developers. Like, you do this, you do that.
Micromanaging the process.
Right. Instead, this great manager just provided the outcome. They said, we need this module to be 100% bulletproof and scale to 1 million users. That's it.
And what happened?
The team autonomously decided to rewrite it from the ground up using test-driven development. They figured it out in a single afternoon.
A single afternoon. That's amazing.
A task that usually took a week. And that only happens when a manager provides the safety net for experimentation.
And under that motivates category, looking at the Square and Monzo career ladders, they clearly show that motivation isn't about like throwing pizza parties or cheering people on.
No, not at all.
It's about tailoring the work to the human. One developer in the study noted that when a previous manager tried to mold them into a rigid, predefined idea of what a good engineer should be, their output plummeted.
They felt boxed in.
Exactly. But when a great manager mapped the team's overarching goals to the engineer's actual personal interests, say, letting a security-obsessed developer handle the authentication protocols, they thrived.
But you cannot achieve that without immense empathy and psychological safety.
Right.
In fact, the ZYTHR hiring guide focuses heavily on behavioral questions designed to test exactly this. They want to know if a manager can cultivate a space where engineers feel safe taking risks.
And building that empathy requires real tactical maneuvers, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
Like, there's this specific detail from the Microsoft study regarding one-on-one meetings that I just loved.
Oh, the home field advantage thing.
Yes, a manager noted that they deliberately hold one-on-ones in the engineer's office or at their desk rather than making the engineer come to the manager's office. They call it giving the engineer home field advantage.
It's brilliant because the physical space dictates the power dynamic.
Totally. Walking into the boss's office instantly triggers that visceral anxiety of being called to the principal's office.
Exactly.
Mm.
By going to their turf, the manager strips away that hierarchy.
They sit down, they talk about life, they talk about their weekend, and it builds a baseline of camaraderie.
Which is crucial for when things go wrong.
Right. So that when something inevitably goes wrong in the code, and it always does, the engineer doesn't spend 3 days trying to hide the bug. They feel safe bringing it up immediately.
Mm.
But this brings us to what happens when things fail externally. Because the old management cliche is praise publicly, correct privately. But the sources go so much deeper than that. They talk about the EM acting as a literal blame shield.
Yes, the blame shield. And the mechanisms they use to do that are what separate the good from the great. It's not just about taking the heat from the executives.
Yeah, what do you mean?
Great EMs use systems like blameless postmortems to completely depersonalize failure.
Depersonalize it. Okay.
Yeah, so if a database goes down because an engineer deployed a bad script, a bad manager asks, "Why did you do that?"
Right. Pointing fingers.
Exactly. But a great manager pulls up a postmortem document and asks, "Where did our deployment pipeline fail to catch this error before it went live?"
Oh, wow. So they remove the human from the line of fire and blame the system instead.
Precisely.
There is a powerful example of this in the sources where a team completely forgot to write tests for a specific software scenario.
Oh, yeah, I remember this one.
The executives found out and sent this angry email demanding answers. Now, a mediocre manager replies to that email and throws the specific developer under the bus to save their own skin, right?
Naturally.
But the great EM replies, takes full responsibility on behalf of the team, and shields the developer from the executive blowback. Only after the external threat is neutralized do they address the issue internally.
And how they address it internally is critical. The Monday.com source emphasizes that teams with high psychological safety solve problems faster because they aren't wasting cognitive load on self-preservation.
They aren't terrified of getting fired.
Right. When the EM finally does sit down with that engineer, they aren't hyper-fixating on a single one-off mistake. Software development is inherently volatile, Mistakes will happen.
Right, so they treat failures as learning opportunities, focusing entirely on pattern-based feedback.
Exactly. Pattern-based.
Like if an engineer ships a bug once,
Yeah.
you fix the bug, you update the test suite, and you move on. You don't even bring it up in a performance review.
It's just part of the job.
Right. But if they ship the same type of bug 4 times, now you have a pattern. Now you have a conversation about their understanding of the architecture.
Furthermore, the timing of that feedback is a huge indicator of managerial competence.
Oh, this was a big point.
Huge. The sources note that delayed negative feedback is a catastrophic failure of leadership.
Catastrophic.
If you wait 6 months until a formal performance review to tell someone they've been documenting their code incorrectly, you've robbed them of 6 months of career growth.
And you've likely deeply damaged their trust in you.
Completely broken it, yeah.
But, all of this internal psychological safety is totally useless if the team is constantly being bombarded by external executive demands.
Oh, sure.
Like, you can have the safest team culture in the world, but if the CEO is changing the product roadmap every Tuesday, the developers will just burn out.
They'll leave.
Right. So how does an EM protect this fragile ecosystem they've just built? This takes us to the final major function in the Microsoft framework: mediates.
Yes. This is where the EM acts as a cross-functional diplomat.
A diplomat.
Yeah. The Microsoft study uses the corporate term randomization to describe upper management or external stakeholders constantly changing requirements or, distracting developers.
Throwing random things at them.
Exactly. The EM's job is to be an impenetrable noise filter. One surveyed developer actually praised their manager specifically for keeping the path so clear that they could just sit down and maintain a flow state to code for 10 hours straight.
10 hours without an interruption. That's the dream.
Not a single tap on the shoulder.
But you can't just tell the CEO to go away, right? When the CEO demands a new feature by Friday, the EM can't just say no.
Well, no.
The sources emphasize that a great EM translates technical reality into business currency using soft data.
Right, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the EM Tools Guide and the concept of DORA metrics become the manager's best weapon.
Tell me more about DORA metrics.
They measure things like deployment frequency and mean time to recovery, so it's real, hard data about team speed and stability.
Let's look at how that actually works in practice then. When that CEO demands the rushed feature, the EM doesn't argue about code quality. Because, let's face it, the CEO doesn't care about code quality.
They just want the feature.
Right. So the EM pulls up the DORA metrics and says, our deployment frequency is currently 5 times a day with a recovery time of 10 minutes. If we rush this feature without proper QA, our recovery time will spike to 4 hours.
Is this feature worth bringing the whole app down and halting transactions for half a day?
Hmm.
They advocate for their team by framing technical debt as a literal business risk. They push back on unreasonable deadlines by proving the cost of those deadlines using data, not emotion.
Which is so much more effective. And part of mediating that environment involves ruthless process improvement. The EM Tools Guide is very explicit that process should be evidence-driven, not opinion-driven.
Yeah, you can't just add a meeting because you feel like it.
Right. EM shouldn't just change a workflow or add a new daily stand-up meeting because they read some trendy tech blog. Every process has a literal cognitive cost.
Meetings consume time.
Approval gates slow down delivery.
Documentation adds overhead.
Oh, true.
The best engineering teams feel lightweight and incredibly fast, even when operating at a massive enterprise scale.
And how do they do that?
Well, it is almost always because their manager is obsessively auditing their workflows. They're eliminating unnecessary meetings, they're automating approvals, they protect the team from process bloat so the engineers can focus solely on what they do best.
Just writing code. So what does this all mean? If we synthesize the Monzo ladders, the ZYTHR guides, and this massive Microsoft study, the journey from being a great individual contributor to a great engineering manager is fundamentally an identity shift.
It really is.
You are trading your compiler for empathy. You are moving from a world where your value is measured by your personal technical output to a world where your value is measured by your ability to act as a force multiplier.
It's a multiplier, yes.
It's about cultivating talent by giving them the autonomy to solve problems their own way. It's about motivating them by using blameless postmortems to eliminate the fear of finger pointing.
Removing that blame.
Right. And it's about mediating the chaos of the corporate world using data to push back on executives so that brilliant people have the quiet, focused space to do brilliant work.
This raises an important question, though. And it's something to really analyze within your own career, even if you aren't writing software.
Absolutely.
Look at the leadership structures in your own industry. How often do we blindly promote the best technician, the most aggressive salesperson, the most creative graphic designer, the most precise accountant into management, only to watch them flounder?
We see it all the time.
We do it because the organization values their past personal output more than their actual capacity to act as a multiplier for others.
That is a phenomenal point to walk away with. We naturally gravitate toward what is measurable, like compiled code or closed sales, but leadership isn't binary. It's inherently messy and human.
Very messy.
Mastering that messiness and learning to build systems out of people rather than syntax is where the real impact happens. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take these frameworks, look at the dynamics within your own teams, and ask yourself, is your leadership optimizing for output or are they optimizing for multipliers? We will see you next time.